I like this circular wheel. It's the typical Western horoscope wheel. But what I've done is I've taken the sidereal Vedic format and used this Western wheel with the sidereal values. This is one of the worksheets that I use. There is another worksheet that I'm particularly fond of, and this is the Parashara's light system. We just create a new chart for this moment, which is now, and I have personalized view, which gives me a whole lot of interesting stuff here, which you're probably not seeing because there you go, that might be a little bit better for you. This is actually my typical worksheet, which I use when I'm seeing clients. This is the Placidus system using the Krishnamurti Ayanamsha. This is the basic Rasi or sign by sign chart here, starting with Aries here and going around all the way through Pisces. This breaks up the houses into different divisions, and this particular system, the Krishnamurti system, is what we call a Sukshma or stellar-based system. We have the signs of the zodiac, but we have the 27 nakshatras, which make up that 360-degree zodiac circle. So this system is primarily concerned with not necessarily, let's take an example here, the exalted north node in the sign of Taurus, so much as, if we look down here, the stellar position, which is the star called Mrigashira, which is ruled by Mars. And it's this planet, what we call the stellar dispositor, which dominates and transmits its effects through this agent. And we use the word agent very, very clearly here, that the planet itself can only, look, if the milk truck is coming down the street, the only thing it can deliver is milk. The only thing I'm not going to say only, the primary thing that this particular planet, Rahu, transmits is the effects of this Mars-Uranus conjunction here in the sixth house of war, disease, offense, impulse, violence, overreaction. We see the combination with Uranus, progressive, aggressive, and so if we were to look at this planet in the Western, or typical system rather, we would say that it's in the 8th house, both from the standard chart and also from this Placidus chart. It's in the 8th house, and we would say, oh, well, the effects of the 8th house are there, Rahu in the 8th. That can be problematic. 8th house is the house of death, has reference to disease. It also has the subtler tantric, esoteric expression, which is the house of self-transformation, the natural house of Scorpio. And whilst it does give some of that effect, that's why earlier I was incorrect saying that it can only give, it can only deliver. Not only, but it will give this 8th house stuff, and it's exalted. It can show inheritances, a lot of money involved. If we were to give a typical reading, Rahu's secretive, there could be secretive issues surrounding money, sexuality. The Mars and Uranus combination in this chart for this particular moment. Let's get back to the colour chart. I like a little bit of colour. Now I'm going to have to swap around and change my perspective. I like this chart too because, as well as the typical Vedic aspects or angles, what we call phase angles on the chart. We have the Western style aspects here. You can see the green aspects of what we call favourable or supportive intervallic functions between them. The red ones are actually dissonant. These are what we call the hard aspects. And so now if we look at this chart, as we said earlier, here we see counting this way. This north node is in the 8th house. It is in the star of Mars and in its own subdivision, what we call, it is the sub-ruler of that particular stellar area. And some of these divisions they can go down to a breath. There's what we call sukshma, very, very fine. For practical purposes, we don't go down to that level. Normally, we just go down to 2 or 3 levels, which we can do over here just to get an idea of, great. I don't use this program much, I think. There you go. That goes down to 3 levels here. So we get smaller and smaller intervals of time when we're looking at these planets. We want to see how they play out not just in terms of their spatial coordinates, but also in terms of the time extrapolator. Where are you, Arnie? Just when we need you. By that, we're converting the positions of these planets in space to this, what's called Vimshottari Dasha, or the Vedic system of progressing the planet based upon the lunar star at birth. Here we see the lunar star, and the moon is in the star of Jupiter, so therefore Jupiter is the ruling planet for this cycle, based upon that stellar interval. I'm starting to waffle. It's late, you'll forgive me, but I just wanted to, when I'm looking at a chart, I'm just sort of thinking out aloud here, so you can get an idea of how I move around the horoscope and how I get information. We see here, for example, although Rahu will deliver this 7th house positioning. Is it 7th house here? This looks like Mars might actually be in the 6th house. And Uranus, they're both in the sign of Aries, but this system, which divides up the signs, as you can see here, into these stellar placements as well, indicates that Mars sits on this side of the 7th cusp. The 7th cusp is the western point at the time of birth, or the event. Right now we're seeing the event here with these 2 planets, Mars and Uranus, on either side of that 7th cusp on the horizon. So it's what we deem to be still a conjunction, but they're going to play out a little bit differently in the subtlety of their effects. They're still both in the sign of Aries. This is the fiery sign, as we know, and Mars is in what we call its domicile. So Mars, in this instance, as the ruler of this planet here, is going to give a very, very powerful influence of the 7th house. Now, there's an interesting point here, and that is that it's very, very interesting, actually. It's just come to mind that if you look at the Vedic chart of Adolf Hitler had Libra rising with Mars in the 7th house. And the moon is here as well, which makes this Libran sign a very, very powerful angle or ascendant. Because in Vedic astrology, we look not just at the ascendant, we look at the lunar ascendant, and it's in the same position, and we look at the solar ascendant. But here we see that Mars is sitting angular in its own sign, both from the ascendant and from the moon. And this constitutes a particular type of special status, if we could use that. The status of Mars gets elevated. The dictum is that if the planet is in its own sign or an exalted sign, and simultaneously in the angle from that rising sign or the moon, in this case both, it becomes empowered. And it really brings out the flavour of that particular planet. And it's quite coincidental because right now this is describing, if we're not looking at a particular individual, it's very much describing the moment and what's happening in the world right now. And I'm not going to mention any countries or any personalities. I'm really just trying to stay in the space that allows me to understand and interpret this language, because it's a language, as you can see, all of these positions of the planets at any moment are serendipitous with what's going on here on the planet. See, Mars is just recently into Aries, but it's empowered. Hitler had the exact same thing in the 7th house. It shows us the warlike nature of this particular moment. So it's, I think it's very, very telling of the moment. You must also understand that, and I've just, out of the blue, I've just isolated these two planets just to give you an insight into how, if I'm analysing any planet here, what it may mean to me as the astrologer, and, you know, what it may mean to me because of what I actually see in that positioning of the planet. And here we see both the planet in question, Rahu, exalted Rahu in the 8th, and its stellar dispositor, Mars, associated with Uranus, is in the 7th, in what we call Ruchaka Yoga. That heightened yoga simply means configuration or positional expression. Gains what the Vedic astrologers call Ruchaka Yoga. There are 5 of these, and they relate to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, and Venus. The luminaries aren't involved, and the outer planets aren't involved. So these are called Pancha Mahapurusha yogas, or Maha means great. These are endowed with special strength. When these planets are in their own or exalted signs, simultaneously being in the angle from the ascendant or the moon, and some would say even from the sun, if you want to use a little bit of astrological license. But I was about to say, so these are the primary planets, but have a look at the aspects, because then we get another level of colour. So Mars is already in a state of excitability there. It's really, it's in its element, literally. But we don't like to see this. We don't like to see this square coming from Saturn. And here we see these two planets, first and foremost, are not exactly the best of friends. So, not only are they not best of friends, but they're both agitated here in this situation. They're extremely agitated. Saturn is also in the angle, and, also in its own sign. So it too gains this very, very unique status of being a Pancha Mahapurusha yoga, one of those 5 great yogas. And when Saturn is in its own sign or exaltation sign, identical with that angle, and here we have it on the 4th angle, it is called Sasha Yoga. Sasa Yoga. It empowers Saturn to bring out all its flavour. So these two planets, in their own right, are really, really in positions of strength. And now they're challenging it. They're in a fight here, essentially. Let's have a look here. Now, we have to look at the degrees of the planets if we're going to get even greater insight into how these planets operate. So we know the elements are strong. They're strong in their own elements. They're angular at the same time. In their own signs. Therefore, these two Pancha Yogas are battling it out. Enemies to start with, both empowered, and in that hard 90-degree aspect, which is what this square aspect is, 90 degrees. A 90-degree phase angle between these two planets puts them in a position of great dissonance. And so the degree of Mars, the faster planet, is moving into the square. And they call this an applying square. And I've got to be honest with you, I've forgotten off the top of my head. The aspects themselves have names of yoga. I remember some of them off the top of my head, Kambula yoga and Ithasala. I think it's an Ithasala yoga, they call it, where the faster moving planet is moving into exactitude. It can be any phase angle. It can be a trine, it can be a square, it can be a sextile. As the faster planet is moving, as we see here, 6 degrees, it's not quite 90 degrees. It has to get to 8 degrees. And at that moment, I suspect, let's have a look. I can't see what the cusps are here. I can count it though. What's that? That's 10 degrees. So it's still on this side of the cusp, even at 8 degrees. But at 8 degrees, which is in 2 degrees from now, and you would have to look at the ephemeris or the table of dates when that happens and progress or transit that planet to that exact degree. We'll know the date that it's exact. In any case, as these planets move into this angle, they build up more and more tension. And the classic meaning of the Mars and Saturn right angle or square is war. It's brutality. And we can see this as brutality in terms of, well, the COVID virus has been brutal enough. But this has a very strong Hitler flavour. You know, it's got a strong Uranus here is revolution. You know, and that's angular with the planet that's got its Rachaka Yoga. Jupiter, which is normally endowed with that quality of, you know, beneficial counteraction, you know. It's the benefactor, it's the guru, it's the planet that's going to make it all right. You know, they say that even if there are hard aspects in the chart, the favourable aspect from Jupiter will soften that. And my teacher was always very, very big on that sort of stuff. You know, I would come out and blab off about, oh, well, this is going to happen. He said, no, you've got it all wrong. I said, what do you mean? Look at these. He said, no, you've forgotten Jupiter. Jupiter over here is also simultaneously casting an aspect, he would say. And I go, right. He'd say, you can't assume that the worst. And there are some scriptures that say that when Jupiter has a favourable angle, it neutralises a lot of the dissonant energy in say this square aspect here. So it alleviates that. Here we don't see that alleviation, mainly because Jupiter firstly is debilitated. That's part one of the story. I'm going to tell you the other part. It's debilitated, but also because it too is in the square or the right angle to Mars. And if you understand I just mentioned the square between the Mars and the Saturn is a combination that produces a lot of tension, a lot of volatility, a lot of anger, a lot of violence. These two planets are the creme de la creme of violators. And Jupiter is the excessive planet. These two will create a lot of frustration, a lot of friction. And Jupiter, because it's the planet of amplification, is going to do exactly that. It's going to amplify this situation. Now, it's an interesting thing here. I'm just trying to show you another little interesting astrological tidbit that just pops out as it has, and that's what I love about doing this. You start to see things. You see how I mentioned there's a 6-degree aspect between Mars and Saturn, but Jupiter, which is faster than Saturn here, has passed the aspect of tension, you see. But what's happened here is that Mars is faster than both of these planets. So it is bringing the energy of Saturn back in contact with Jupiter here. That's technically called a translation of light. It's a transference of that power that appears to have passed because Jupiter is past Saturn, but Mars is acting as a mediator there to bring some of that Saturnian and Jupiterian energy back together, as if it's culminating, not dissipating. So that's intensifying this thing. And then you've also got Mercury involved in this. So we have to analyse, and I'm not going to go into I just wanted to give you a little bit of a hint. Lesson 1, I've probably thrown you into the deep end. I would like to get back on track and look at perhaps some more simple approaches, starting with the elements and, what the houses mean, that sort of thing. I'm just assuming that many of you that are watching this already have some of that knowledge. And even if you don't, when you hear me saying this, that or the other, if I'm giving a daily reading or a weekly or monthly or, whatever reading, I'm sure some of you must wonder, how does he come up with that? What's the mechanism behind how he arrives at that determination? Is it a whole lot of bullshit? Or no, there are, as you can see here, there are strict principles. I've only looked really at these 3 planets here, but then shown how they're involved here. Neptune's involved here with Rahu. These are generational aspects. And you can see again, this Rahu normally moves in a counterclockwise movement because that's its nature. Neptune is moving forward. So these two are in what we call an applying square. That is really showing us and you can see here that there's another connection to the south node. These are the karma points in the chart. And so where you've got this Neptune energy squaring both of them, you see, it's applying to both. And that is what we call, well, Westerners call it a T-square. You see that it actually has that shape of a T. That's a very, very powerful tensile aspect. And the nodes are always to do with generational influences, the societal influences, and the way that we're, connected as a community, as a group. The square aspect obviously challenges all of that stuff. And so there's a direct link. We don't see any lines coming from Mars to Rahu. So I've sort of gone back to front in a way. I just wanted to show you how, even though there are no lines or apparent aspects between Mars, Uranus and the node, by virtue of the stellar rulership of the position of Rahu, all of these other things here are playing out, and Rahu is only giving the results of what's going on with Mars here. So this generational influence, this cultural, communal influence of Rahu has all of the influence of its dominant theme, which is Mars, war, the square, the expansive nature of it. So I would say for the time being, and I don't want to alarm you, but I think just from this perspective, things are going to get hotter before they get cooler. And so what I'd say to all of you there is, the rising sign here, Libra. What's Libra? Libra is the sign of balance. The moon is here. Other people say, "Oh, lovely, the moon is here." And so in Vedic astrology, we pay very special attention to the moon, and we see, for example, that it is in a dark phase. Oh, well, it's actually in the dark phase. The full phase finds it directly opposite the sun, and now it's becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. So here, it's moved down into Libra, and the moon is what we call Avaroni. Avaroni means descending. So there's a couple of things about the moon which, number one, it is dark because it's past its full moon phase. It's the governor of the 10th house of this horoscope, which is governance itself, politics itself. And so what you see here is the falling nature, because it's dark, very dark. It's not, soon it will be here in the vicinity of the sun, and then again the new moon cycle starts. But Avaroni means, we mentioned the position of these planets. The moon is similar, negatively placed like Jupiter here. In just a few degrees it will be in the debilitation sign of Scorpio. When it's in the sign before, it's not yet debilitated, but it's almost like you're in your car and you're just about to go over the cliff, and just imagine that it's like, yeah, I'm still on land, but not for long. And can you just imagine that feeling of sheer terror? So when the planet is moving into that next sign, which happens to be its debilitation, it's Avaroni, and it's going, I'm going to die. So it's in a state of, it's alarmed by this fact. And I think the falling nature of this planet, if what I'm doing here is looking at this planet just as a now chart for what's been happening in the world right now, I'd look further to simply the conflicts that are going on at the government or societal level and say that governance itself is falling. The system and the way that, the populace of this planet, the human species, is governed, is moderated, is adjudicated, is handled, is looked after, is educated, is philosophized to, is indoctrinated, is conditioned. That whole process, and notice I say conditioned because the moon is also the nurturing quality. So even the way that our current cultures have been reared on the familial level is really all wrong, and that's what this reset is about. If we talk about reset, without actually getting into the nitty-gritty politics of the left or right, this explosive, Uranus is very progressive in its nature. It's going to blast all of this apart. And for any human being to be arrogant enough to think that they're going to somehow have some say over the way nature dictates how this species is going to end up, quite likely like plenty of other precursors to Homo sapiens, all long gone. Mars is that arrogance, Mars is the arrogance with Uranus, but it's actually in a way that arrogance that is going to, that's going to work in the same way that the overdose of the heroin addict can act as an epiphany. It can, in some, not all. We hope that this combination here might do that, but it is very alarming that the 10th ruler, the ruler of the 10th house of any chart, is really the culmination of the chart. And unfortunately, this doesn't say much for this race. That the epitome of the chart, the ruler of what epitomizes the flowering of the seed of human nature, or the flowering of the seed of, the species of mankind. Yeah, it's not anything really. There are things we can be proud of, but when the bulk of the population of your species is starving, that's the nurturing quality of the moon in its dark phase. It's doesn't cut it. Ask all of those starving people whether they reckon the governments have been doing a good job. Up there in. I'm not allowed to say. My lips are sealed on that, but you know what I'm talking about here. And this is how, I would equate this. I'm sure there are many other astrologers out there. It's, a horoscope is like a painting. You're looking, half a dozen people are looking at a painting in the art gallery, and this one goes, wow, look at that. See the two lovers cuddling and kissing. The guy says, no, I saw Winnie the Pooh. You know what I mean? So astrology is like that too. I'm fascinated by the way other astrologers interpret the chart. Often we, if we're skilled at what we do, we'll somehow come to the same conclusion in very, very different ways, in very different interpretive ways. All paths lead to Rome. So this is how I see this. There's a lot more material here. We've just touched on a few planets and how these aspects play out, and what it may mean on a societal level. But this is the beauty of the chart. What I love, the Hindu system. We haven't even gotten into what we call the D9 chart here, which is the ninth harmonic chart, which some astrologers are of the opinion is an even more powerful chart than the birth chart. This shows where the resonance of each of the planets peaks in the space-time process. But that's for another video. It's very, very late here. It's almost 2 a.m. I did get dressed up to, I guess, represent this Mars-Uranus explosion. It looks pretty explosive, doesn't it? It looks like someone unmentionable with that red button dropped an atomic bomb on a paint factory. And here it is, reflecting perfectly this moment. Look, it's been great talking to you. If you've got any questions, I enjoy doing this. I think I'm going to do a few more, and you're more than welcome to tune in and leave me your thoughts. If you want to get some more information on astrology, go over to astrology.com.au. That's my home, where I spend 15 hours a day. And don't forget to subscribe. Take care. Bye bye now.